Go ahead and say your full name.
Oh, Harris Dusenbery.
And your 10th Division assignment?
My son. At Camp Hale, I was in C Company, a rifleman, C Company, in the period from October, approximately 10th, I believe, to June when we went down to Camp Swift.
And the year?
And the year was 1943 when I started at Camp Hale.
And you were always 86?
I was always with 86, always in the 1st Battalion. My entire career in the 10th Mountain has been sent with the 1st Battalion of the 86th.
And the highest rank you served?
The highest what?
Highest rank?
Oh, the highest rank I served was Staff Sergeant, which I hardly deserved because that was awarded to me after the war was over.
And how about your serial number?
And my serial number is 39339-874.
That's just all the basic housekeeping we had to get on the tape. Harry, can you tell me a little bit about how you came to serve in the 10th?
Oh, I notice you've been calling me Harry. My name is really Harris.
Oh, I thought I heard everybody calling you Harry.
They were wrong.
Yeah, sorry, their mistake. Sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah, but I have been called Harry often in the past in the Army.
Okay. How did you come to serve in the 10th?
I suppose it's a long story, but I'd been a skier and climbed mountains and all, and I was interested in the mountains. And when I heard that there was a division being formed of volunteers who were supposed to be skiers and mountaineers and all, that it attracted me to it. And I heard in mid-43 that they were going to stop taking volunteers. And so my draft number was, I thought, well, would come up in the next few months, even though I did have a child, a pre-Pearl Harbor baby, and was married, that I decided that if I was going to be taking the Army, I wanted to be with the 10th Mountain Division. And so I asked for voluntary enlistment, and that's the way I got into the Army. I did have my 3 letters of recommendation and took them with me up to the center at Fort Lewis, where I was given my initial tests. I went through the very normal tests that I guess all people who are initiated into the Army go through, and I presented my letters there and I asked for Camp Hale assignment to the 10th Mountain, the Camp Hale, and they said that they had to confirm with some, and they didn't know what office it was, but they said they had to confirm it from someplace back east, and apparently it was, they had to confirm it with Minnie Dole before they would send me to Camp Hale. And so I waited around a couple of extra days at Fort Lewis before they sent me on to Camp Hale. And,
because you're an author and you were taking a lot of notes at Camp Hale, what sort of things were you taking in that you knew
well,
were valuable?
I was taking in. You might be interested in knowing that I wrote an 8-page letter to my wife describing my first day in the Army.
What was your first day like?
First day like? Well, it was rather hectic, and I remember one of the things that going through the physical tests, after going through the physical tests and my papers were filled out, one thing I noticed about my papers, that there was in big letters stamped all the way across these papers, and the words were Army only. And that was because my eyes were not good enough for the Navy.
When you think about everything that happened to you at Camp Hale, what really stood out?
At Camp Hale, I think that I think I was because I was older than most.
The truck over.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't you come over towards me just a touch?
Harris.
I think I accommodated to the elevation, for example. I think better than most troops and quicker than most troops did.
Okay. Honey, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
It's better to catch a mistake
Yeah,
than
yeah,
let it
yeah,
go.
you're
I'm
right.
sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay.
Okay, we'll start with
Yeah.
how old were you? When you enlisted?
Yeah, yeah. I was 29 years old. I was married and had a pre-Pearl Harbor baby who was about 2 years old at the time. And I had worked several years for Social Security Administration after graduating from college. So I was much more mature than the average inductee into the infantry.
Is that an advantage?
That was an advantage I felt in some ways, in that I perhaps was more calm in making decisions, and I felt I had more endurance than some of the young fellows did, and perhaps could abide by the hardships perhaps a little better than they could.
Any disadvantages?
The main disadvantages, I think, were that that I didn't have certain types of energy quite as much as to a high level that some of them did.
How did you acclimatize to the altitude at Hale?
I don't know just whether I did anything special. I think that it just worked through things to the best of my ability, and it seemed to work that way, that I did accommodate to the elevation and it was quite an adjustment, that 6 weeks of recruit school that I went through, and was my only basic training that I got in the Army, and it was pretty strenuous workout. And
Tell me about it.
well, that we, as I recall it, we would have to go out in morning right after an early breakfast for setting up exercises, calisthenics of various kinds. All the details I do not remember, but it generally took 20 minutes to half an hour, I think. And at sometimes the temperatures were down below zero when we were doing that exercise, and that it was an ordeal, but for me it was something. Well, this is the Army, and this is what I was going to try to do my best at.
So it was a challenge? Would you say it was a fun challenge?
It was a challenge. I don't think I'd describe it as a fun challenge. No, I think it was more just a real challenge to accommodate to the harsh conditions in which I found myself.
Well, you took lots of notes at Hale. What sort of things stand out?
Generally speaking, it's pretty much of a routine. That one of the requirements was that we had to spend 2 nights a week out camping out someplace in the mountains outside of the barracks, and in a way I enjoyed those experiences out of the barracks, and I found that we did have adequate equipment to protect us from the cold, and basically I felt that the equipment was very good, and so I really enjoyed the trips that we took out on our skis out into the woods and mountains, and spent the night there at some place. And I think one of the reasons for that when we were out in the mountains, that we felt like we were somewhat removed from normal Army routine, and you didn't feel that sense that, well, the Army was always telling you what to do. That you had a feeling that you had a little more freedom of action out there in the woods, and that was a part of the training that I particularly enjoyed. And of course, the overall experience that I had was D-Series, which I think most of the 10th Mountain men will say was their overweening experience at Camp Hale.
How would you summarize your experience with D-Series?
I think that probably my experience in D-Series was perhaps a little more intense than the average. That I think that I did have some notable experiences, particularly in the second week of the series, when we climbed up to from Camp Hale up to the ridge line up towards some of the mountains there, Sugarloaf being one, and bivouacking up at an elevation of close to 12, or maybe over 12,000 feet. And the various maneuvers we conducted up there were definitely hard, I think, in the sense that you were pretty much at the limits of your ability to keep warm, and on the one big patrol that we took, that I was on, that lasted all night and into early the next morning, and actually on that day I'd started on in the morning from Camp Hale. I'd started in the morning about 8 o'clock. I think we left Camp Hale, and I was on my skis constantly then, without ever having my skis off for the next 20 hours, which is an unusual experience, I think.
I take it you didn't sleep.
And I didn't sleep that time, no. And at the end of that when I took my skis off, at the end of that period, what I did, I took my skis and put them with the bindings down, the flat boards, and I borrowed a sleeping bag. I crawled into the sleeping bag, and I laid down on my skis to sleep, and I did manage to get a couple hours sleep then, sleeping on my skis. Oh, and I might mention that that the reason why I was sleeping on my skis is because surprisingly, it was softer than sleeping on snow. And the reason for that is that if you sleep on snow, that the snow compacts and hardens under you in lumps, and it gets after a few hours very rough. But the bottoms of your skis are flat, and they cannot get rough. They can only get hard and flat, and that's better than sleeping on something that's rough.
You guys were thinking. When you think about battle portions of your Army service, what sort of, tell me
something about the battles? On Riva Ridge is the, I guess, most notable action of the 1st Battalion of the 86th. And at the time I was officially listed as a scout observer in the S2 section, or the intelligence section of the battalion. But for the River Ridge operation, I was working in battalion headquarters, and I was in battalion headquarters when we were doing planning down when we were back at near Lucca. And at that time, I remember that Sergeant Anderson was building a sand table model of a particular mountain range, and it was top secret as to where that mountain was. But it was indicated and that it was going to be a place that we were going to attack. And I remember that after the sand table model of the when it turned out to be River Ridge was finished, then the various units of the battalion, the officers and some of the non-coms were brought into battalion headquarters and shown this model of River Ridge and pointed out various aspects of where they're going to go and all. And it was felt that the sand table model would give them a better idea of the terrain that they faced than just looking at maps and aerial photos. And so that was really my first encounter with the operation from River Ridge. And then during the, after we moved up to the battalion headquarters which was set in the town of Farney for the River Ridge operation. One thing I might mention that a couple of days before that, Lieutenant Ware, who was the battalion S2, and I and a few other troops moved up to Naga to get ready for the River Ridge operation. And one day, it was 2 days before the River Ridge operation, Lieutenant Ware decided to make a final patrol up the Capalbusa Trail to survey it for the possibility of using mules on the trail. And so because we wanted to avoid detection from the enemy, there were just three of us, Lieutenant Ware, Sergeant Thompson, and myself were the three men selected for that patrol. And we went up River Ridge about 2/3 on the way up to Capalbuso, checking out the trail to see if we thought the mules could make it. And we did, as I recall, note that there were a couple of places where we thought that the engineers should try to make some improvements in the trail to make it safer for mule passage. And we were fortunate on that particular day because the top of the ridge was fogged in. And so that, there was very little chance of our being detected. And so actually it was a pretty safe operation. And then the next night, we had to move down into the whole battalion had to move down into the operation get ready for the operation. But we did that the day before, or the night before, and then we had to all during the next day we had to stay in buildings and places and not show any action to the enemy, and then the River Ridge operation itself started about 7 o'clock the next morning, or the next evening. And while the battalion were working their way up up the ridge, I found myself in battalion headquarters and recording the battalion journal as messages came in from the companies and all. I was writing down what the messages were for the battalion journal.
What were you thinking when you were writing them down?
Well, I don't know. In some ways, there was a sense of excitement in the battalion headquarters that I mean, I don't know. It wasn't quite like a game, but it was a contest. That, I mean, to see if the various units and how they were doing, what the progress they were making up there, because they were quite widely scattered in various routes up River Ridge, and over about, I don't know, probably a stretch of 4 miles apart from F Company on the far left, and one platoon of A Company up to Piso di Campiano on the right. And there was quite a distance between them, and they had various distances to go, and so it was exciting to get those reports in, progress reports in from the companies.
How about other events later on in battle?
At the time I was really assigned to be Lieutenant Ware's Jeep driver, and I was driving his Jeep with basically pulling a trailer, and the basic cargo in the trailer were maps and supplies for the headquarters. And after River Ridge, then I had to drive the Jeep around to actually to Gaggio, Montana, and get ready for another operation. And then I was back actually at the motor pool. Well, after River Ridge and Mount Belvedere and let's see, what are some of the other ones? Della Trecia, I guess, had all been captured. That I was back in the motor pool, waiting for the next phase of our action, and finally, in the final phase, well, we move forward. The 1st Battalion, now in sort of the forefront on the left, and moved in through Sasso Malare, and finally up to the top of Mount Grande Diano, I believe it was. And at that time, I brought the Jeep up to a motor pool, and then was ordered to take my Jeep on up to Sasso Malare. And when I got to Sasso Malare, that it had just been taken with quite a few casualties in the battalion, and I remember that there was a lot of excitement around, and that was one of the reasons for that was that there had been about 20 men sleeping in a building, and a German 88 shell came through and knocked a hole about a foot in diameter.
This is part 2 of Harris Dusenbery. Part 2 of Harris Dusenbery. You know, a lot of mothers didn't want their kids going into infantry.
Right, and of course, and those are the smart mothers, weren't they?
What did your mother say?
I'm not sure what she thought. That I think that she, I don't think was too surprised that I asked to go into the infantry, maybe, but and she thought that that it was the infantry was perhaps the most important job in the Army, and that it was important she recognized that some people had to serve in the infantrymen, and that and she was perhaps willing to see one of her, to do her duty by seeing that one of her sons went into the infantry.
And what do you think the 10th contributed when you look at the effect of the 10th in the war?
I have a little difficulty thinking what they contributed. I mean, I think that, of course, it was for the men who were in the 10th, it was a very defining experience. And I think that all the men of the 10th have that feeling that it was something unusual and that and special, and that it was a little different than what the ordinary infantryman would have encountered. But in the overall scheme of things, I don't think one of the things that perhaps was a little disappointing is that.
Let's hold this thought for just a second. Just when a truck comes in, it's a little overpowering.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, that perhaps we were a little. Sorry. Stop again.
Thank you. Now we got it.
No, okay, that we were a little bit disappointed that there wasn't a battle front that would really test us in the real winter and mountain warfare that we had been trained for. That while there was a certain ruggedness maybe in the Riva Ridge operation and in a few of the other mountains here, it was, as far as mountains are concerned, it seemed fairly tame compared to what we had trained in. And but of course we were also glad to have the whole thing over with. That I think that that didn't register as a disappointment. Yeah, practically all the aircraft flying protection for. Okay.
You know, considering how long the 10th Mountain Division was activated, how can you explain the significant impact it had on its members' lives?
I find it difficult to really explain it. It is something that I feel that must go back to the D-Series experience. That as the great challenge that D-Series offered to us left a very profound impression, I think, on the men who took part in D-Series. And I think that it seems to me to be the core of the reason why there has been this continuation of interest in it, because that was such a defining element in the lives of the men who took part in it.
When you were in the most difficult situation, whether it was training or actually in battle, what kept you going in the most difficult situations, you personally?
I think it has to be just a sense of commitment to do the job, and I think another factor, and one of the things I might talk a little about, and that is the Infantry Squad, and the Infantry Squad that has trained together, has been together for a good many months or years in case of some 10th Mountain Division squad, develops a very close esprit de corps. Then a sense almost that you might consider to be a love of one man for the other, and recognition that they are willing to lay down their lives for the other men in their squad. And I think it's that cohesiveness of the squad that is really a fundamental element in well, really in winning battles. It's a very important factor.
Now, can you think of anything else that you will wish you had said later? I always think of those things.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just a tactical question. Fighting Mount Belvedere and moving on to Delaterracia and these places, were the odds against the division? Do you see that? I mean, I realize that the other side had advantages of height and of being able to see and everything, but do you think you beat the odds, or I mean, how would you describe that?
I don't think that in entering combat we thought about it in terms of either beating, winning, or losing the odds. We recognized that there were definite dangers, but I think every man in his heart had the feeling that there wasn't a bullet or a shell fragment for him. That it perhaps for someone else, but not for him. And I have a feeling that we went in with that attitude. I think that you have to have some hope in order to be an effective operator in any type of situation, that you have to have a certain amount of hope that you can be successful in it. And so it's some ways it's amazing to me that the men did do and accomplish so much in our overall operation. One of the things that I was describing about going up to Sassomalare, and when I got up there, I found out that Sergeant James Matthews, who was our section sergeant of our S2 section, had been killed on Mount Grandiani, and that Lieutenant Ware then asked me to give up driving the Jeep and to come back officially as a scout observer on the in the S2 section. And then that day that after the Mount Grande was attacked, the headquarters decided, and I might mention too that our battalion commander had been wounded on taking Sassomalare, and he had gone back to the front. And it was decided that we should send a Jeep from Sassomalare up to the top of Mount Grande to, and I was not sure at the time I left what my mission was, except another officer and a couple of men rode with me, and we had vague general directions about the way to go and the route that the engineers had supposedly cleared of mines. So I took my Jeep down the road from Sassomalare and off towards Mount Grandiano. And I remember down in the valley that we're not sure what roads about the roads, and I think I took an incorrect road and rode up towards there and through a couple of little villages, and it wasn't listed as a road. It was shown on the maps as a mule track, and I drove my Jeep up through this little village there, and people all waved to us and all that recognized that we were But unfortunately, that was still no man's land. And German patrols were going to be there for several more days and weeks going through that area. But eventually I did get up to our battalion headquarters, drove up to our battalion headquarters, and found out that I loaded onto my Jeep the bodies of 2 dead soldiers, and I carried 2 more wounded soldiers on my Jeep and carried them back. But and as I drove west, or drove east from battalion headquarters, within a few minutes that the Germans started attempting to shell that building that was supposedly a battalion headquarters. And but anyway, I got back with that load of dead bodies. I don't think Sergeant Matthews was one of them, but I don't know. They were in mattress covers, and I don't have any idea who they were. But when I did get back, Lieutenant Ware said that he had to send me up to the front.
Pause for a second. I have a follow-up question. You know, do you have any knowledge of what Army brass, how they might have assessed the risk management on this? Did they anticipate pretty heavy percentage casualties to the 10th Mountain in general?
I find that a little difficult to answer, but I think my estimation would be that they knew that the 10th Mountain Division was well trained and in a way felt itself as an elite division. And they knew, and I think they knew from past experience that well-trained and elite divisions generally have high casualties. And in my estimation, well, I don't. That would be the only remark I think I could make about that.
Why would they have a higher rate of casualty? Because of the situation, or because the men tended to extend themselves?
Because the men tended to take more risks, for example, in order to accomplish an objective, and feel they owe the duty to their unit to go further than most units would.
Now, being at 86 HQ for Riva Ridge, what was their anticipated casualty rate for the Riva Ridge expedition in particular?
In a military action, you never anticipate casualties. I mean, you don't think about casualties. You don't plan for casualties. You as much as possible, you try to put casualties out of your mind. I mean, in the back of your mind, you may know they're going to be casualties, but you try to do everything you can to put that out of your mind. And so you can't say that anyone anticipates casualties.
I actually had heard a number associated with Riva Ridge. I didn't know if you could confirm that there were some expectations of between 80 and 90% casualties on Riva Ridge.
I think that some people, who are looking at the perhaps from higher headquarters, who are looking at the operation, looking at the terrain, and looking at the fact that it's a new unit that hasn't really been battle tested to any great extent yet, and who probably don't have any real knowledge of mountain climbing, for example, and getting over there, and I see how such a person could easily make that assessment.
But it wasn't a general.
If you want to a real explanation about the Riva Ridge. In my book, The North Apennines and Beyond, I included Colonel Hampton's report on the Riva Ridge operation, and that gives it in great detail the planning that went into it.
Anything else?
Well, do you think there's something more?
Something more.
This is Harris Dusenbery Part 2.
I think that, I might mention that the 1st Battalion of the 86th was in reserve when we made the breakthrough operation. And so that for those first 2 days that our battalion was not actively engaged in it. And one of the things that I did in that first day was to go out on to a viewpoint a couple of 100 yards in front of our CP, Battalion CP, and with my field glasses, and watch the action that was unfurling before me. And I remember being, from my position, being looking right across the valley at Rocco Cornetta, and then up the valley towards Torre Usi, as far as Torre Usi. And I remember seeing the 87th, I've forgotten what unit of the 87th it was that was moving up towards Torre Usi and taking that. But I remember how intense the German artillery fire was on those troops, and I could see the troops move through maybe a wooded area, and then suddenly there'd got a big barrage would come down amongst those troops, and you see quite a bit of smoke and dust come up in there, and you'd wonder how anyone would survive that, and then you'd see the troops get up after that explosion and move on. And I knew several times, and so I saw that very intense action of the 87th in taking Torre Usi, and then closer into Torre, or into where my position was, I was able to see the 2nd Battalion of the 86th crossing an open field. And I didn't see any artillery coming into those units crossing that open field, but every once in a while I'd see the men on the field hit the ground, and I assumed that they were receiving long-range machine gun fire or something like that. But I could see them making their progress across that open field there towards Rocco Rufino. And that was one time where, and then finally towards the end of the afternoon, then I saw a group of our soldiers go on up after the Rocco Rufino had been under this intense bombardment all day long, go up to the top of the rock, and they brought out about, it looked to me like maybe 10 or a dozen German prisoners who had survived the bombing, and that apparently we knew I could see from that we had taken Rocco Rufino, which was a very important point, and he knew that.
I'm keeping you from someplace. Hi,
No.
Evelyn.
More like that.
You want to repeat that, Harris? This is Harris Dusenbery, and then we're at the shore of the... Ray Ewing may come in here too, so kind of exchange ideas. We're at the edge of the Po River, and Harris is reminiscing about our crossing the 87th.
In the afternoon, I remember one day, and they were the 1st regiment of the 10th to across the Po River, and then the 86th went across and the following morning. Now, generally the 87th, I think, had paddle boats, didn't they? Assault craft that the engineers called.
We went across in rubber boats.
Rubber boats with paddling across. Yeah. And the next day, the next morning, well, we went. The 86th went across in ducks because they had been able to bring up ducks during the night.
Oh, that's
so we crossed in ducks. And I was looking at the terrain here, wondering where we might have crossed. I know we didn't have banks that high on the opposite shore, and it looks to me like it's more like that land that you see out there, as being the type of land that there was a little bank that we went up on the far side, but it didn't seem to be as high as this side.
It also was a little more like that land there with the shrubbery and so on. It wasn't. These are dikes that have been built to take the brunt of the curve of the water.
I think there has been some work.
But you know, the A and B company of our battalion, we were in C, Ed and myself. A and B went across first. I think we were in reserve, but we didn't have very much, as I recall, very much in the way of enemy fire as we paddled across. But we sure as hell took a pounding on the south side of the river while we were waiting.
While you're waiting.
And I was with another guy from the 10th laying in a shell crater waiting for the order to go at the time. Yeah. And but we did go across in ducks. Now some people remember real heavy shell fire, but I don't.
Ray, you said the south side. Did you say waiting on the south side?
Waiting.
Waiting.
Not waiting.
Waiting.
We were waiting to go.
To go on the south side.
Yeah.
Okay. That clarifies that. Yeah.
But doesn't the some of the terrain and all and the river banks look like a good possibility as to the area where we crossed?
My sense of it is that
here.
we were down here, but you know it's 58 years ago. And,
right. And this new bridge is entirely new.
Yeah.
But
this is the abutment of the old bridge that they blew up.
And this very well could be. It certainly looks.
That's
looks like an old bridge abutment.
That's what Peter Austin said. That
he
was
did.
The abutment from the old bridge. Well, in my sense of it was we were in this direction, downstream from
the old bridge.
This arrow here is where the 1st Battalion went east of the lake and north and came down into Naga. And there's a shelf, and apparently they came down right up in that high saddle, coming down this way. I said, remember, you were marching this way, there was no roads, and in that field the bombing occurred. So that was this is a real mountain trooper action. That's not a trivial hike to rise up the cliffs above the lake, go around a mountain called Dosso Cassina, and coming down and attacking the town of Naga. So that's the 1st Battalion of the 86. The same guys that took Riva Ridge. Not a bad outfit.
Right. And I don't know about General Hayes' idea, I think, of trying to outflank Torbo. He felt the main defense was going to be at Riva and Torbole, so that this was an attempt to outflank the strong defenses in those places. And that's why this operation took place.
Just like Norman.
20 years old.
Harris?
Yes?
What was the strategy rather than the tactics? Were you trying to kill Germans or take real estate?
Well,
I'll take a shot at that. The General Hayes, they wanted to get to the Brenner Pass and stop the Germans. Their overall goal was to stop the Germans from getting back home, to getting back up to the homeland. So they wanted to cut them off. They wanted to cut off the Germans before they got to the Brenner Pass and got back home. There was a concern, whether it was true or not, that the Germans would have a redoubt, a defensive redoubt, and would hold out for a long time. To the extent that that was a real threat, nobody knows. I don't know now, but at least it was a threat that they believed then. And the idea was to stop the Germans from getting back to the homeland. And so the objective was to get up to the Brenner Pass. Fortunately, the war was over here. And one of the things that
would the Swiss cooperate with the Germans going back?
Would the Swiss cooperate with the Germans?
my feeling is the Swiss would cooperate with anybody, but non-apolitical or not a polite statement, but I think that's true.
The Swiss interred any forces who went to Switzerland, whether they're Italian, German, or Americans, or whatever side. If you went over into Switzerland, you were there for the duration.
Be a good place to be.
And you're interned.
One of the things that Harvey Wieprecht will tell us later on, that he persevered north. This is the town of Naga. We're going to go now to the town of Arco, which is over that way. And you have something. I just want to say one point one thing Harvey will tell us. He explored some of the attack routes north of Arco, and he reports that it would be an extremely difficult battle. So it's a mercy the war ended on May 2nd. Schwartz, hold it, please.
Okay, my best estimate that the bombing took place about 50 yards beyond that building up towards the mountain.
The small building out there looks like a tool shed.
Yeah, and just maybe 50 yards or so up towards the mountain from that tool shed is where the bombing and those casualties took place.
Was that shed there?
I don't remember whether it was there or not, but
is there a road over there that you were on, or were you in the...
There weren't, that I recall, no roads coming down from that mountain.
You were in the brush, in the woods, yeah.
Yeah, but I know lower down that there were some trails, and I recall coming into Nago and passing that spot. We were on a narrow trail.
Did you come through that gap? Up there?
No, you see, we came up the high saddle, up down there, and worked our way down the mountains. And,
Did you hear that?
yeah.
So you said you came down from that high saddle.
Yeah.
Watch where you're walking.
We came down from the
Dog
high
shit all
saddle,
over the place.
and at the time the bombing here, headquarters company was way up there on that mountainside, in that high saddle.
Okay, we'll start with your name.
Okay, my name is Harris Dusenbery, and I'm was in the 1st Battalion of the 86th Mountain Infantry of the 10th Mountain Division in World War II. And at the end of the war, we're at the upper end of Lake Garda, and the 1st Battalion was making assault to go around the northern end of the lake in an envelopment movement. And our destination was the town of Nago, just northeast of the north end of Lake Garda. And I do have a description in my book, The North Apennines and Beyond, which describes our approach to the town of Nago. And I'll read a paragraph from my book. After getting word to move our headquarters company into Nago, we switched back down the mountainside and passed the spot where what was left of the bodies lay. Blood and bits of bone and flesh and sheds of clothing lay scattered over the ground. Someone had made a partial attempt to clean up. Along the trail there was a gunny sack of arms and legs with the grisly ends sticking out. No bodies or heads were visible. We surmised that they had been simply blown apart. This is the thing that gnaws at your heart. Yet in war we have been hardened. Without a tear, we hurried on to get by this awful spot, silently thankful that it had not been our time to die.
What page is that on?
And this is on page 127 of my book, The North Apennines and Beyond.
The circumstances surrounding this were a bomb was dropped?
And to the best of our knowledge, it had to be an aerial bomb, and at least a 200-pounder to do that much damage to the people. And apparently that it lit fairly close to a closely bunched unit of the B Company, of the 86th.
In Civadale where they got the...
Remember. Yeah, everybody else married in, but I mean, you were there before. Are you rolling? Okay,
So
I wanna
what
start
do you
by
want to know?
Well, I want to start by slating your name, if you'll say your name. This is Evelyn Dusenbery,
Right.
married to Harris, and they were married before he enlisted in the 10th Mountain Division, 86 HQ1. Evelyn, what was he thinking when he joined the 10th?
I don't know, because I wasn't sure that he would be drafted, and our son was 2 years old, and I was devastated when he left me. Right, but I know that he was really very happy in the 10th, and if you'd read have you read his first book? In the back of it, he talks about the bonding of this group, which has been a very important part of his life since then.
Now, when he joined the 10th, what did you feel?
I said I was devastated.
You want to expand on that, or just devastated pretty much sum it up?
What more can I say? And so David and I went home, our son David and I went home and stayed with my parents. And one thing, my brother was in the service, and when the postman brought a letter for even me from Harris, or for my parents from my brother, he always rang the doorbell. And so the one day he rang the doorbell, and I went, and there was an officer in a uniform, so I knew what it was. And for 2 years I didn't want to answer the doorbell. And of course at that time Harris was in combat, so that was particularly bad to have my brother killed at that time. So.
Sorry to hear that.
Right, so.
How did you adjust? Or did you ever adjust to him being in the 10th Mountain Division?
I never adjusted to him being gone. No, but now I know that, yeah, it was a fine part of his life, and so I think I've shared that with his interest and his joy having been in the 10th, right? And so here I am again for the 7th reunion. Although I thought this was a bit much. But every time they have one, you say this will be the last one. Then the next 3 years is another one.
Well, 7's a lucky number.
Right.
You don't want to miss that.
Right.
After 6, you're going through 6.
Right. So.
When you think back on how it was for you when he was in the 10th, you want to tell me a little bit about where you were when he was at Hale and?
Oh well, our son David and I were with my parents, and it was where I had lived before I was married, and so I was very happy to go there. And then I got a part-time job, and then my mother was sort of babysitting the rest of the time.
Did you ever visit him at Camp Hale?
Oh no. No, I couldn't. I don't think I'd afford to. He wasn't getting much money. And then I think it was pretty difficult. I don't know how you'd have. Yeah, I think. Furthermore, he never suggested I visit him.
Well, it sounds like you spent a lot of time taking notes and writing letters. So.
Right. Oh yes. Well, he's told you about our letters going to Denver, right?
Is there anything else that you'll wish that you had said once your interview's over?
No, I won't remember that till midnight tonight.
Well, you call me back. If there's any other stories that you want to add, or any other perspective.
No, I can't think of anything. In North